If you're planning to start selling on Amazon this year, I've put together a really simple getting started checklist to help you make sure you haven't missed anything important. It's the list I wish I had when I first began, and it covers the key things you need in place before you list your products on Amazon. You can download it for free and the link is in the show notes.
Welcome to the Bring Your Product Idea to Life podcast. This is the podcast for you if you're getting started selling products or if you'd like to create your own product to sell. I'm Vicky Weinberg, a product creation coach and Amazon expert. Every week, I share friendly, practical advice as well as inspirational stories from small businesses. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome to Bring Your Product Idea to Life. So today I'm speaking to Sophie Bell, Managing Director of Toast. Toast is a branded content and TV advertising production agency. Whether creating a traditional advert, social post or documentary, they're always looking for interesting ways to connect brands to their audience and finding diverse talent to help them do this. I had a really great conversation with Sophie all about video and how video fits as part of your brand strategy and how you can use video to help to sell your products. We covered a lot in this episode and it's a really great one to dig into. I would love now to introduce you to Sophie. So hi Sophie, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So can we please start by you giving an introduction to yourself, your business and what you do?
Yes, so I'm Sophie Bell. I'm MD at Toast, and we are a production agency. We create all sorts of different types of content for brands, from documentaries to TD ads to social content, and sort of stills as well for out of home, etc. But I'm sort of particularly interested in helping brands connect to their audiences through discovering kind of authentic voices to support their brand and bring their messages to life. So story finding is something that we do a lot of at Toast for brands. And that's very much been a red thread kind of throughout my career across all types of content, from documentaries, ad-funded programming, branded content, etc., and advertising. So yeah, it's really this intersection of kind of commercial and editorial that we are very interested in.
Brilliant, thank you. And how would you describe story finding for someone who isn't familiar with the phrase?
So really, that's about finding those authentic stories for your brand. So whether that's working with clients for internal stories, so they're within their workforce, to find those people who are the right voices to convey their messages on whatever kind of platform or content that might be, or whether that is finding individuals who kind of their stories resonate with their brand. So that could be going down more of a kind of influencer advocate route, or it could be actually more about finding someone whose story particularly aligns with a product that you've got coming out. So say it's something that has a particularly interesting sustainability feature, and it might be finding those people who have stories that relate to that sustainability feature. And therefore, by sharing their stories and bringing that into your conversation, you are helping by default kind of elevate that message that you're conveying.
That makes a lot of sense, thank you. And we will come back to storytelling a bit later because I would really like to ask you more about that. But let's start off, Sophie, with, I know you've worked with a lot of brands and a huge range. What are some of the common threads you see in the way successful brands tell their story?
Yeah, I think a key thing is always a bit of a single-minded proposition. So we talk about that a lot across whatever type of content we're creating. And obviously longer form allows you to go into more depth, and that can be a rationale as to why you go down more of a longer form route with your content. But particularly in short form, you really don't want to overwhelm your audience with a lot of different messaging points, which sometimes as a brand, you think, but I've got 10 amazing things I want to say, and I really should get that across because otherwise I'm not delivering the message. But actually, an audience probably isn't going to remember those 10 messages. And then you run the risk of actually people not taking in any of the messages. So it's it's much better to have more of a single-minded proposition and to really focus on, like, what is the key takeaway you want your audience to remember from watching this piece of content? Make sure you land that. And then the rest is the rest of your customer journey can fill in the blanks of the other information that you want to convey along that. So I think that's a key thing. And also, back to sort of the story finding and partnerships, I suppose, is a big thing. So knowing when to use partnerships and in the right way. So I think, again, brands who really embrace why they are choosing to do any kind of partnership, whether that's, with another brand, or whether that's an individual story or an influencer of some kind or an advocate. I think it's making sure that you allow them to do what they're good at and why you've decided to partner with them, and not try and control it too much. So I think that's another sort of success point we see. And also just focusing on audience, I think, is a key thing. So kind of back to the point of, don't try and put too many messages in. Don't think about what you want to convey because you feel that's really important for your business. Actually think about what the audience needs to hear and what's going to move them to action.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Because the follow-up question I had as you were talking was about, it sounds like keeping your messaging simple is the key, particularly when we're talking short form, are we talking like reels, really short form video, things like that?
Anything up to 30 seconds, really, I think. If you've got that short space of time. Once you get to the minute length, you can put a little bit more in. That does give you a bit more wiggle room, but certainly up to 30 seconds.
So we're just looking at one key message, really.
Yes. I mean, it depends what it is. Obviously, there might be kind of nuances around that, but I think it might be you convey other things in that time frame, but the overarching element has to be a key message that you are conveying very clearly, so that the audience remember it. You just want your audience to remember it, really.
And I think you've sort of partially answered this already, but I will still ask if that's okay, because I think it will be useful. Is how do we determine what that key message we lead with is? Because you've worked with so many brands. I work with lots of brands, and there's lots and lots of great things they do that they would want to shout about and convey to customers. How do we distill it into like a really simple message?
I think sometimes it's actually just about making really hard choices. That you just can't do everything in one go. So you've got to start with the thing that you feel is going to shift the dial the most, is going to be the most important, that establishes what your brand stands for. Depending on what type of content it could be a very different answer. But yes, I think sometimes it isn't always an easy answer. It's not clear, but it's about being confident, and I'm going to go after this thing, and I'm going to measure that and drive that. And that's what I need to focus on, because if I try and do 10 things at once, I'm spreading myself a bit thin.
That makes sense. And I guess it also must come into a bit of what will resonate with a customer as well, because there can sometimes be a bit of a disconnect between what we as founders think is important and what our customers think is important. So does that play a part as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's hard because obviously it's subjective. You're in it, you're living and breathing it. And so what you feel might be the most important thing, you do just have to take that step back and think, does that align with, if I was the audience, if I was the customer, will I think the same thing? And often it is aligned. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this is, I think often it is aligned, but it's just making sure you've gone through that thought process.
That makes sense. So authenticity is something that's talked about a lot. What does authentic storytelling mean, and how can we make sure we're getting it right?
Yeah, I think it is talked about a lot, and we talk about it a lot, and we are very passionate about authentic storytelling. I think, in its simplest level, it's about being honest and true and transparent as a brand. So if you're telling your own brand story, it can be very successful if you hear from that founder, if you really understand some of the challenges that founder's gone through, or maybe why they've come up with a product, because it's to solve a problem. Or, we don't need just the shiny end result version of the story. We quite like some of the jeopardy. I mean, stories are all based around jeopardy. So having some jeopardy in there is no bad thing from a storytelling point of view. But I think it's choosing what to say. Obviously, it's still got to be a strong piece of communication, but I think being transparent is a kind of key part of authenticity. And then also this sort of element that I've already touched on around finding those stories to tell that are genuine. So whether that's your internal workforce, who are your advocates, they're your best advocates, really, as a starting point. So therefore, whether it's making sure that you're allowing them to actually talk authentically, whether that's a piece of content that you are filming and capturing, or whether it's just allowing them to post certain things on social, but not forcing them to have to say certain messages or monitor that too much, which is perhaps a bit scary. And you have to be quite brave to do that. You have to be confident. But if you've got a very strong mission and vision, and your workforce know that and they're behind that, then trusting in that, I think, is a really good way of doing it. Or whether you're working with other people in some kind of partnership capacity to tell their true stories and allowing their stories to speak for themselves. And then it's a bit more of a halo effect in a way.
That makes sense. And something that often resonates with just me personally when I see content online is when it looks a little, when I say less polished, hopefully you know what I mean. It doesn't look overly produced. It's somebody maybe just talking straight to the camera. That sort of content, I feel, does look really authentic. You can see there's no like lighting and studio. But is that something you recommend, or how would you balance that? Do you know what I mean? What's your take on that sort of content?
I mean, we love creating content that looks cinematic and visually beautiful. And so, that's obviously something we do as filmmakers.
Yeah.
But I totally agree that it's not about that. It's about finding the right way of telling the story for the story. So for me, the narrative has to come first. The narrative is always first. And if the narrative doesn't require beautiful cinematic shots and actually it would undermine the story, then it shouldn't be used. But whereas if actually it's the type of story where that elevates it because it helps bring something to life, or if you're a premium brand, then you want the content to reflect that, So I think it's choosing the medium, if you like, and the way you film that feels right for the narrative, but always start with the narrative first. And I think ultimately, especially if you're working with real people, whether that's, your own people speaking for the brand, or working with other people in a sort of more documentary style, or kind of influencer content, advocate content, then you really want to make sure that you are allowing for spontaneity. That's a key element. So, and that's what I think doesn't really matter how you shoot it, but it can also bring a sort of more elevated look, really can resonate on a personal level. Even if it does look quite beautiful, it can still feel very authentic and personal. It doesn't have to look shaky and like it's shot on an iPhone to feel that. So I think it's those spontaneous moments where it's the unscripted bit that you weren't expecting somebody to say, that in the moment you can get out of someone, and that's, it's not the perfect soundbite on paper, but it's comes across very well in person emotionally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I think that does make a huge difference if there's some sort of feeling behind what's being said.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening who feels like, maybe there's a bit of pressure to make sure they're creating lots of content, particularly video content, what are some of the essentials they can focus on so they can show up, but also not burn out and still obviously have time to run their businesses as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is hard. And I mean, obviously we're making content for brands, but we still have our own brand and we feel those same pressures as, as a small business. It's challenging. I think, again, the key thing is knowing what your story is and making sure that you're consistent with that. So yes, quantity of content is important in the current landscape. But actually, I think you just need to focus on quality first and foremost, because then the quantity will come. If you know what your story is and what you're trying to convey, it's so much easier to then understand where you should be and what you should be doing. And it's a very sort of, it's not rocket science, I suppose, but it's know your brand and make sure that everyone who works for you, whether that's a tiny team or a large team, has that same vision, so they can speak for you on your behalf and move that forward and make good choices then around how you're communicating.
That makes sense. It sounds like it's better to do less content really well than to feel the pressure to get a video out every day, every a few times a week or whatever. It'd be better to focus on doing it really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, I would just caveat that I'm not a media agency. So I'm sure a media agency would probably have very helpful and useful statistics around what works well and what you should and shouldn't do. But from a creative point of view, I think, yes, you know, it's better to, and we have some brands, you know, who have used the content we've created for a very long period of time. You know, it's, and yes, of course, you want fresh creative every day, especially for social. And, you know, like the different platforms need different things. But certainly for a TV ad, for example, you know, we have some clients who've used those for years and effectively. So, yeah, I think, and you can do little things to tweak content as well, where you don't have to, for example, if you are shooting something professionally and you have done a proper, you know, sort of production and there's a hefty budget that comes with that and you want to utilize it, it's also thinking about that up front. So you can make sure you get maybe some extra bits that can be repurposed down the line. So you start with a key piece of content, but then you've got some extra stuff. You've got stuff that's bespoke for social that comes off the back of a key hero piece of content. So that can help you give that longevity to a campaign, but actually it's sort of derived from one piece of content. So that can be helpful as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I still think, as you say, I'm also not an expert in this, but I still think that from everything you've said, it does make sense to focus on high quality content rather than just churning for the sake of it.
I think it's hard. We all feel that we have to kind of keep up with everyone around us. But I think if you're true to yourself and your brand and what you're trying to achieve, then people will listen to that because it's a more compelling message.
Thank you. Now, I'm sure there may not be a black and white answer for this, but I'd really like to know, in your experience, for brands selling physical products, are there any types of video content that are more effective than others, or does it completely depend on the brand and on the product?
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, not a media expert, but from our experience of the kinds of brands that we work with, you know, DRTV is often what brands come to us for. So I think that is a clear way. If you're going to do advertising, then that's something that's sort of more measurable in terms of its impact. But I think also Instagram is really good. You know, we know that a lot of product brands use Instagram successfully. And I think it is just that thing of, yeah, be wary of just following trends and try and stand out with an authentic voice, you know, to bring that brand loyalty. And better to have a smaller loyal audience who then spreads the word, and you try and have your audience as your advocates as much as you possibly can as well. So yeah, again, story first.
And that's really useful. Thank you. And are there any common mistakes you see brands making with their content? So obviously we're not calling anyone out here, but is there anything that you see coming up where you think, oh, if they just fix that, that would be useful to our listeners?
I think the too many messages thing, I mean, that has happened. We've made ads for brands. We've gone, it's too many messages, and then they have it and it's not successful, and we re-edit and with less messages and it's more successful. So it, you know, it's yeah, I think it's really is a key thing in that shorter form content. And sometimes it is also just trial and error. Like sometimes you do have to try things and see how audiences respond, and that's really important. Like we have strong partnerships with media agencies so that we can make sure that that process is integrated from creative, from ideation and production through to that distribution, to make sure you understand. It's a sort of test and learn, and if actually you need to evolve things or adapt things, then having an idea that has a bit of flexibility if you're not quite sure which focus you want at the start. So yeah, I think the simplicity is probably my go-to answer, but it is really important.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So if someone listening wants to improve their brand storytelling, what would you suggest they focus on first?
I would say I probably firstly would want to know a lot of information around like what they've done already, what their vision is, etc. But not to sit on the fence. I think it's that internal team element, knowing that vision and how they're communicating. So if you're improving it, if you want to look at that improvement in a quick period of time, I think actually just understanding, auditing what your team know and where you want them to get to. And then I think it's that strong brand narrative. So are you telling that story? Have you already told your story? Do people know what you're all about and what you stand for? Or actually, do you need to start some work on that? And then you can plan how you would do that to kind of turn that round as quickly as possible.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Now, I'd love to pivot just ever so slightly and talk about AI, if that's okay, Sophie,
Yep.
because I read an article that you wrote fairly recently about why AI isn't just for big companies. What made you feel that that was an important message to share now?
Really our own experience. So I think, we have been watching closely everything that's happening with AI in our industry. There's obviously a big shift to let's create everything with AI. Let's not need to go out filming. Let's cut costs is a big part of the narrative, um, and efficiencies, and be able to have creative execution that you wouldn't be able to shoot because it wouldn't be possible to do certain things. And that's all really exciting and, you know, is something that we are eagerly a part of. But I think for us, it always felt a bit out of reach. It felt a bit, that's for the big post production houses who can afford to spend loads of money on developing that. Now there are more platforms where you can give it a go yourself. But I would say still in the professional environment, not everybody is using that yet. It's not something which, if you're not using it, suddenly you're not a filmmaker. We are still doing traditional filmmaking right now. So for us, it was like, okay, well, how can we use AI that's relevant to us and um, is something that we don't have to spend loads of money on? Because it's, you would have thought, oh, I need loads of coders to be able to start this, and that's a massive investment. That's just not even, I can't even think about that for us. However, I do think that, there are a lot more kind of AI inspired coding platforms now that are letting smaller businesses try out ideas and to sort of get prototypes up and running in house that we didn't have before. I'm not the technical expert by any means. I'm the creative editorial side of what we're doing at Toast. But my business partner, he is much more technically savvy. And so he has been trying out various AI tools. And yeah, so we kind of got to this point where actually it was more accessible. We could try something for ourselves. And he was able to sort of take my ideas of what would benefit our business and then try and kind of put them into practice. So I think that's why it feels like it felt like a good time for us. And therefore, I think it should be a good time for small businesses to be able to experiment a bit. Yes, you need a bit of technical know-how to be able to access those tools in the right way and to experiment. But really, I think it's about figuring out what the problem is that you want to solve with AI for your business. So rather than just what's everybody doing in our industry with AI, and there are lots of practical tools that we're using for like the administrative part of the process, I suppose, in our industry. But this, I mean, more in terms of creating a tool for yourself that's more of a bespoke product within your business, if you like, or can help enhance what you do as a business.
Thank you. And what are some of the things for anyone who is quite new to maybe content and AI, what are some of these things that these tools can actually do for you?
It can help you with coding, and it can just mean that you don't have to therefore have the extensive knowledge that maybe you might have needed in the past. I mean, as I'm not the technical person, I'm probably not going to go into a lot of
Yes.
detail here because I'll just get it wrong. But yes, it allows you to experiment more if you understand a little bit about coding and how that all works. So I think, but as I said, I think the key thing is actually knowing why you want to use it, what you're trying to create, and it comes down to the expertise that you have as a business and making sure that you're making the most of those still, rather than it being about the technology. So the technology is the enabler, not the driving force behind it. And it's thinking, okay, well, if there's something that I want to achieve that actually AI would be very good at helping me achieve, then maybe I should go and experiment and see if I can create something.
Perfect. Thank you. So I know you've spoken about AI elevating creativity rather than replacing it, which I think is what you've been saying. This is a tool, isn't it? It's not going
Yeah.
to. AI personally, I don't think is particularly creative, but it can follow instructions and it can complete tasks. So what does that look like for a small product brand? How might they use AI in a way that can help them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think AI is fantastic at taking kind of vast amounts of like unstructured data and giving it structure. That's how it was described to me when I sort of started this whole AI journey. And that sort of clicked in my, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I think it's very good at you taking unstructured data, giving it structure. And then the humans are very good at what we do best, which is like interpreting that, exploring that, and iterating that for the best results. And that's really the creative bit. So yeah, by saying kind of AI elevates creativity, is it's trying to use AI to give you a starting point, a springboard from which you can then do that creative thinking bit, whatever that might be. And so, yeah, I think it's that thinking what in your workflow requires working with unstructured data, with a lot of data. And therefore, could AI help to give it structure? And we know that it does it quickly. So that is a real benefit. But for us, for example, it is the speed 100% because we're using AI to find real people's stories, to find those authentic stories. And so traditionally we would have spent hours and hours researching. And then you kind of often are limited by only having a few stories that you actually find that fit the matrix of criteria that you're looking for. And you sort of have to go with what you find rather than the ideal is having a nice long list and you get to look at that list and really think about why those people would be good and what's good about them and what are the common themes that come out of that. So with AI, we can do that much better. So if we're trying to find stories that, have some kind of profile online of some description, brilliant. AI can look at that, can help find those stories in a very complex way and give us results that give us those ideas to start thinking. So we can then still do our kind of journalistic process, if you like, but and our commercial process as well of what works for a brand if we're working with a brand. But we've got a great starting point that's much quicker. And therefore, it allows us to elevate our creative because we can put more of those human hours into the creative bit. So that's what I mean in our business. But I think for any business that applies the same. And yeah, and I think it's just sort of then you can match this sort of a bit of internal know-how and a vision for how your business could utilize AI and making sure that you use that knowledge and expertise to turn it into something, unique for you or at least relatively unique. It might not be completely unique, but it might be that you're doing it and that you've trained the AI in a certain way that makes it really work for you.
Thank you. And so is there a certain tool that you're using at Toast to do this?
We use lots of different tools. So it's definitely not about trying to create it all ourselves. We couldn't afford that. And also, it's good to have tools that are out there that are constantly updated and that you can have in your system. So we use a number of different tools and we bring that into our platform. And then it's about the AI agents that we have trained with our knowledge and expertise, our kind of editorial knowledge and expertise to ensure that the results that we're getting out of it are helpful for us.
Makes sense. Thank you. And so, final question, Sophie. Thank you so much for everything you shared. I hope you've got time for one more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if someone wanted to start experimenting with AI, what would you say would be a good first step?
I mean, I think there are so many tools out there that you can just start using just to get a feel for it and how it works. I mean, I think when we started using it, coming from sort of more traditional internet searches, it was all keyword searching and getting into the mindset of it's not keyword searching, it's prompts. We all know about prompts, but just what that means and actually just doing that a bit for yourself is a different way of thinking. It's much more descriptive, which is great, for us and what we're doing for story finding. But I think just experimenting on any of the tools that are available, I think makes it more familiar, makes it less scary, less daunting. But then in terms of developing your own AI tool, I think, yes, you need someone with a bit of technical know-how. Not necessarily, experienced in AI, but enough technical know-how, bit of coding know-how to get into that. That's definitely what we needed. I think without that, I wouldn't have gone down this road because I don't have that expertise, but I did have that within the business. And that was one of the reasons that we looked at developing this, because I was like, what do we have that we can utilize within our business? And then it's also matching that with your subject matter expertise. So yes, that's sort of more the bit that I can bring of actually a tool is a tool, but how does the tool make sure that it really delivers for what you are trying to achieve with it, and how it can be really helpful to our clients? What are all the things that I want to get out of it? And if it's not doing that, we need to develop it to make sure we can do it. And so it's a very iterative process. And I think it is really working together, that technical, and whether it's creative or design or business strategy or whatever it is, bringing those things together to develop an idea. And it takes time as well. It's taken us, we've been doing it organically in-house to begin with, so it sort of takes months, and that's a good thing, because actually it really now is what we want it to be and what it needs to be.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you shared, Sophie. It's been
Pleasure.
really useful. So we're going to have links to everywhere people can find you in the show notes. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely talking with you.
Thank you so much for listening right to the end of this episode. Do remember that you can get the full back catalogue and lots of free resources on my website, vickyweinberg.com. Please do remember to rate and review this episode if you've enjoyed it, and also share it with a friend who you think might find it useful. Thank you again, and see you next week. Hi, this is just a little note. So if you've enjoyed this episode, or indeed any of the episodes, and you would like to, buy me a coffee or something, you can actually now leave tips. So there's a link to how to do this in the show note. Of course, do not feel obliged to do this. This is a free podcast. This will always be a free podcast. But as I say, if you want to buy me a coffee, you can do that via the link in the show notes.